Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking a really critical and detailed investigation into a subject that, well, it impacts far more lives than I think the official statistics often acknowledge.
Yeah, it's about the massive, often unrecognized impact of trauma.
Exactly. And we're trying to move beyond just the psychological side, the memories, the feelings, to really explore how these overwhelming experiences leave, well, permanent physical traces deep within the body and the brain.
It really represents nothing less than a revolution in how we understand human suffering. I mean, for decades, the main model really viewed trauma as like a narrative problem.
Something you just talk your way out of.
Pretty much. But the sources we've been looking at, they show it's fundamentally a biological injury. And that idea, it really challenges a lot of the established wisdom in psychiatry and medicine, even social policy.
Okay, so before we dive into the science behind that, we really have to grasp the scale of this. Here in American society, anyway, these statistics from CDC research, they're brutal.
They really are.
We're not talking about isolated cases, are we? It sounds more like an epidemic of systemic injury. I mean, consider this. 1 in 5 Americans sexually molested as a child.
1 in 5. And then, add to that, 1 in 4 were beaten by a parent. Beaten badly enough to leave a physical mark.
That's staggering.
It is. And when you look at intimate partner violence, the numbers are, well, just as disturbing. 1 in 3 couples engages in physical violence. These figures aren't just tragic statistics. They kind of force us to recognize that chronic adversity might actually be the norm for many, many people, not the exception we sometimes think it is.
The sources we looked at draw this truly devastating comparison. It really puts the scope of the problem into perspective, doesn't it?
That's right. It's the one comparing soldiers and children. For every single soldier who serves in a war zone overseas, there are 10 children who are endangered right here in their own homes, victims of neglect or abuse.
10 times as many. Wow.
Yeah. The violence, the uncertainty, the terror starts right where children are supposed to be safest. With their own caretakers, it really forces us to ask, how do people even cope with that level of fundamental injury?
Well, the narrative of humanity is often one of resilience, isn't it? We hear about bouncing back from wars, disasters, personal loss. We survive. So if we are kind of built to be resilient, what's the real mission of this deep dive? What are we trying to figure out?
Good question. Our mission, I think, is to understand those indelible traces you mentioned. Resilience is absolutely real. People do survive incredible things. But these traumatic experiences, they leave physiological marks.
Not just stories.
Not just stories. Marks on our minds, our emotions certainly, but also on our very capacity for joy, for intimacy, and critically, marks on our biology, our immune systems. So we need to unpack this journey of discovery, how these psychic wounds become, well, somatic physical, and, maybe most importantly, what we can actually do about it. How do we address them at the root and restore the body's own ability to regulate itself?
Okay, let's try and unpack this with a story. Because often the science starts with, a specific confusing case. The sources introduce us to Tom, a highly functional Vietnam veteran.
Right.
I mean, outwardly, this guy was the definition of success. Valedictorian, decorated Marine leader, successful lawyer, married, 2 young sons. He achieved stability. But inside, the sources tell us he felt completely hollow.
Yeah, he was a total paradox.
Yeah.
Tom himself used the phrase dead inside to describe how he felt. Despite all the external success, presenting this calm, rational front in court or at home, internally he felt emotionally numb.
Like watching himself.
Exactly. He described it as experiencing life like his heart was frozen, constantly observing himself from a distance, living, as he put it, behind the glass wall. You'd wonder how this person, who looked and sounded just like him, could function, make arguments, when he himself felt no real purpose, no gut feeling guiding him.
And that sense of distance, that numbness, it extended to his family, the people he presumably loved most. That's just heartbreak.
It's probably the cruelest part of trauma, isn't it? He desperately wanted to feel genuine affection for his wife and kids, but he just couldn't summon those feelings. He'd go through the motions, hugging, playing, but it felt empty to him.
Like an act.
Yeah. And this emotional numbness, it's often a survival mechanism, right? A way to manage overwhelming internal pain. But the cost is intimacy. It just destroys it.
And then sometimes that controlled numbness would just shatter.
Yeah.
Because of a trigger.
Right. Suddenly it would break.
What kinds of things would set him off? What were his triggers?
They were often hyper-specific and really interesting, nonverbal. Not complex memories, just simple sensory inputs. Fireworks, for instance, would instantly pull him back to the battlefield.
Okay.
Or the intense heat of a summer day. Even just seeing dense, wild foliage, like in his sister's suburban backyard, could remind him of Vietnam and, as he said, drive him crazy with anxiety and agitation. He's basically living in two timelines at once.
That sounds exhausting and terrifying. And his ways of coping were pretty extreme, too.
Yeah, he'd leave home when he got agitated, terrified he might hurt his family, and then he'd engage in really high-risk behaviors.
Like what?
Drinking heavily, or riding his motorcycle at over 100 miles per hour, dangerously fast.
That seems counterintuitive. Seeking danger to calm down. How does that work?
Well, it's critical to understanding what some call the trauma loop. The source material explores this idea of compulsive repetition. Activities that you'd think would cause terror, like riding a motorcycle that fast, can actually provide this temporary but distorted sense of calm for some traumatized people.
But why? Biologically, what's happening?
Well, it suggests that for people with severe trauma, re-exposing themselves to that kind of acute stress might give a temporary release from the constant underlying chronic anxiety. When Tom pushed that speedometer way up, his brain flooded with adrenaline.
Right.
And that massive spike might have triggered the release of the brain's own morphine-like substances, endogenous opioids. He was basically seeking that huge rush of excitement or even terror just to feel something real, to break through that numb glass wall.
So it's like a form of self-medication.
In a way, yeah. A really desperate attempt to maybe achieve some kind of chemical balance or just feel alive again, even if it's through danger.
So if highly successful people like Tom were hiding this internal chaos, how did experts even begin to recognize this fragmented, nonverbal nature of traumatic memory itself?
They started realizing that traumatic injury doesn't follow the rules of normal memory formation. It often manifests through these immediate sensory flashbacks.
Right.
They studied cases like Bill, another veteran. He was given a Rorschach ink blot test. You know, those ambiguous blobs meant to reveal imagination.
Yeah.
But when Bill saw one particular blot, he didn't see a butterfly or a cloud. He instantly shouted, "This is that child that I saw being blown up in Vietnam."
Whoa, that's terrifying. It means he wasn't just remembering, he was physiologically re-experiencing it.
Exactly. 10 years after the event, Bill was fully reliving it right there in the testing room. Not just the visual horror, but he was smelling the smoke, hearing the sounds, feeling the exact physical sensations he felt during the original event.
That's unimaginable.
And what makes flashbacks so devastating, often worse than the original trauma itself, is their unpredictability. The original event had a beginning and an end. A flashback can hit any time, without warning, awake or asleep, and there's no predictable endpoint.
So people end up organizing their whole lives around trying to avoid them.
Yes. All their routines, all their defenses become about protecting themselves against this constant threat of the past, just invading the present.
And the analysis of those Rorschach tests, it also showed something fundamental about how trauma affects the brain's flexibility, its imagination.
It really did. It showed this shocking loss of mental elasticity. The traumatized veterans in that study, they consistently fell into one of two extremes. Most, like Bill, would constantly superimpose their trauma onto those ambiguous ink blots. They were just replaying an old reel of catastrophe.
Their present was just overwritten by the past.
Constantly. But then there was the other extreme.
No, what is that?
Even more alarming in some ways were the few men in the study who just went blank. They looked at the ink blot, the classic ambiguous stimulus, and just said, "This is nothing. It's just a bunch of ink."
So they lost the capacity for imaginative play.
Or even just mental flexibility. That
Yeah.
normal human ability to see possibilities in ambiguity was just gone. So whether they saw catastrophe everywhere or they saw absolutely nothing, they'd lost the functional ability to really decipher what was actually happening around them.
Trapping them.
Yeah, trapping them in a cycle of either avoidance or hyperarousal. And that is the real cost of trauma, isn't it? The destruction of the functional relationship between your mind and reality itself.
That inability to decipher reality, that constant replaying of the past, it really brings us right to the core biological question, doesn't it? If the mind feels broken, it's likely because the brain's survival systems are encoding danger in this really fragmented, visceral way.
Exactly.
So let's shift from the symptoms, like what Tom and Bill experienced, to the underlying neuroscience. How does this actually work in the brain?
Okay, so we have to start with what we often call the emotional brain. This is basically the central command post for survival and also for social coping. And it's older, evolutionarily speaking, and frankly more powerful than our rational thinking part, the frontal cortex.
And it's made up of?
It's composed of the reptilian brain handling basic survival needs, like breathing, heart rate, and the limbic system, which is more involved with emotions, memory, and judging what's pleasurable or terrifying or necessary. Together, they act as your primary internal monitoring system.
But it doesn't speak in words, right?
No, not at all. It alerts you through visceral sensations. That sudden knot of panic in your stomach, maybe a subtle feeling of queasiness, the hair standing up on your arms. These wordless signals fundamentally influence every decision you make, from whether you flee danger to whether you trust a new person.
And this system operates through those famous low-road and high-road pathways for processing danger. Can you kind of clarify how sensory input gets filtered in a normal brain compared to a traumatized one?
Sure. So all sensory information, everything you see, hear, feel, smell, it first converges in a part of the brain called the thalamus.
Okay.
We sometimes call the thalamus the cook or the blender of the brain. Normally, its job is to blend all this diverse input, sight, sound, feeling into one coherent, integrated experience. An autobiographical story, basically. It creates the soup. This is what's happening to me right here, right now.
Makes sense.
But as this information enters the thalamus, it splits onto two main paths.
Okay, let's take the low road first. That's the fast one, right?
Yep. The low road is the express lane. It goes directly from the thalamus deep into the amygdala, which is part of that unconscious emotional brain circuitry. It's extremely fast. We're talking milliseconds.
Wow.
And it's designed purely for immediate unconscious danger detection. It's the system that makes you jump back from a snake before you consciously register, oh, that's a snake. Speed over accuracy is the priority.
Got it. And the high road?
That's the scenic route. It takes the sensory info from the thalamus up to the frontal cortex, the rational thinking brain for conscious awareness, assessment, and, higher level processing.
So that's where you figure things out.
Exactly. The high road is where you realize, okay, that loud bang was just the neighbor's car backfiring, not a good gunshot. It's where judgment, context, and coherence are formed.
So normally, if the high road confirms everything's safe, it kind of tells the low road alarm system to calm down.
Precisely.
But what happens during trauma? How does this system get derailed?
Okay, here's the really profound disruption. Trauma seems to literally break down the thalamus's blending function. That cook stops working properly. So instead of creating a coherent memory soup, the sights, sounds, smells, physical sensations of the trauma get encoded as isolated, dissociated fragments.
Just pieces.
Just pieces. And because the thalamus can't blend them into a past narrative, the memory processing just disintegrates. Time essentially freezes, and the danger feels like it will last forever because it's not being tagged as past.
And those fragments, they keep triggering the low road.
Exactly. They constantly bypass the high road's analysis and hit the low road directly, triggering the amygdala without conscious context or time stamping. This is why Bill, 10 years later, suddenly felt the smells and saw the sight again. Those fragments were still raw, unprocessed, not woven into a story that happened back then.
That explains that perpetual state of being on edge that so many trauma survivors describe.
It does.
And that chronic state of readiness, even when the threat is long gone, that must be incredibly damaging physiologically, right?
It's fundamentally toxic to the system. Adrenaline and other stress hormones, like cortisol, they're vital for short-term fight or flight. In a normal, healthy response, these hormones spike dramatically when there's a threat, giving you the energy to respond, and then they quickly dissipate back to baseline once the threat is over.
But not in traumatized individuals.
No. The source material is really clear on this. In traumatized individuals, these stress hormones take much longer to return to baseline. They can stay elevated for hours, even days.
And they spike really easily, disproportionately.
Precisely. A relatively mild stressor, maybe disagreement, a sudden noise, an unexpected email can trigger a spike in stress hormones that's completely out of proportion to the actual objective threat.
And the long-term effects of that.
This chronic, toxic elevation causes a whole cascade of long-term health problems. We're talking high blood pressure, inflammation, digestive issues, chronic pain. And psychologically, it manifests as that extreme irritability, problems with attention, chronic sleep disorders. The person is literally being poisoned by their own body's defense chemistry running wild.
Wow. This understanding of these physical survival mechanisms, it leads us right to Stephen Porges's work on neuroception and the vagus nerve. This is about how the body unconsciously scans for safety or danger.
Yes, exactly. Neuroception is the term Porges coined for the body's internal unconscious capacity to evaluate risk and safety in the environment. It operates entirely below conscious thought. And the key player in this system is the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve.
Yeah, it acts like a massive two-way superhighway, connecting the brainstem to all the major organs in the body: heart, lungs, gut.
And it has different branches involved in this safety system.
Correct. There are two critical branches. First, there's the more evolutionarily advanced branch, the ventral vagal complex, or VVC. This is what Porges calls the social engagement system.
Social engagement.
Yes, the VVC is integrated with the nerves controlling your facial muscles, your throat, your voice box. When the VVC is engaged, like when you're looking at a friendly face, using a warm tone of voice, maybe nodding it, sends signals down the vagus nerve that literally slow your heart rate, deepen your breathing, and generally calm your entire system. This is the physical foundation for feeling centered, safe, and able to connect with others.
So the VVC is what lets us be social, feel safe with people.
Absolutely. It's crucial for connection. But when the environment feels inescapable, overwhelmingly threatening, and the system can't find a way to fight or flee, when immobilization seems like the only option.
And what happens?
Then the older, more primitive branch of the vagus nerve takes over, the dorsal vagal complex, or DVC.
Okay, and what does that DVC response feel like?
This is the deep trauma response that leads to a kind of complete metabolic collapse. It's the ultimate shutdown response. Think shallow breathing, a drastic slowing of the heart rate, physical freezing or collapsing, dissociation, feeling detached from your body, or reality fainting, or that zombie-like state Tom described feeling.
So the body just gives up.
It's a very old survival mechanism, like playing dead. The defensive system defaults to total shutdown. And in this state, normal social interaction, learning, feeling connected, it's all impossible. The really profound biological insight here is this. To feel emotionally close, to play, to mate, to nurture our kids, basically, to engage in any positive social behavior, mammals must be able to temporarily shut down the defensive vigilance systems.
You have to feel safe enough to let your guard down.
Exactly. But traumatized people are often either stuck in hypervigilance, that low road constantly firing, or stuck in numb, shut down the DVC response. Neither state allows access to that necessary natural state of ordinary pleasure, safety, and closeness.
Okay, so when we look at this immense biological complexity, this chronic, pervasive nature of trauma affecting everything from the thalamus to the vagus nerve, it really throws the limitations of our traditional psychiatric tools into sharp relief, doesn't it?
It really does.
Let's talk about the standard we use to measure mental illness, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Right, the Bible of psychiatry, as it's often called. The sources provide some really important historical context here. The DSM essentially became this incredibly powerful document, but its origins were actually much more modest. It evolved from research diagnostic criteria back in 1980 with DSM-3.
And there was a warning in it.
Crucially, yes. The preamble to the DSM-3 itself included a pretty significant warning. It explicitly cautioned that its diagnostic system was, frankly, too imprecise to be reliably used for complex legal or forensic purposes, or even for insurance classification.
That level of modesty definitely got lost somewhere along the way.
Tragically short-lived, yeah. It quickly became the central instrument shaping the mental health industry, dictating insurance payments, research funding, even court testimony. But by focusing primarily on symptom clusters, things like flashbacks, avoidance, hyperarousal for PTSD, it often failed to capture the deep systemic developmental injury that we see in cases of chronic childhood abuse or neglect. It tended to treat the symptoms as sort of isolated events rather than seeing the fundamental disruption to development itself.
And this focus on classifying symptoms, did that fuel the rise of pharmaceutical treatments?
It certainly went hand in hand with it. Psychiatric medications became the mainstay of treatment for many conditions defined by the DSM. And look, medications absolutely have a necessary place, especially in crisis. But their widespread use, particularly for trauma, has had some, let's say, dubious consequences in addressing the underlying issues.
How so?
Well, think about it. If antidepressants, which 1 in 10 Americans now take?
Yeah.
If they were truly as effective as sometimes advertised in treating the root cause of something like depression, which is often linked to trauma, well, depression should be a much more manageable issue by now.
But it isn't.
Instead, the sources point out that this huge increase in medication use hasn't made a significant dent in hospital admissions for depression. So there's a real risk that drugs can sometimes deflect attention from the fundamental work of trauma recovery, the body-based work, the relational work, and it can end up placing the power to fix a complex life and biological problem solely in the hands of doctors and insurance companies, instead of empowering the person to heal their own nervous system.
So there was this gap, clinically. The standard PTSD diagnosis didn't really capture the experience of kids growing up with chronic abuse or neglect, and that led to a push for a new diagnosis.
That's right. There was a strong, though ultimately unsuccessful, push to include developmental trauma disorder, or DPD, in the DSM.
DTD.
Yeah. And the argument for it was pretty compelling. Early, inescapable maltreatment, whether it's physical, sexual, or emotional neglect, it isn't just a discrete event like a car crash might be. It's more like a chisel that actively shapes the developing brain for strife, for adversity.
So it causes much wider problems.
Exactly. It leads to substantial, pervasive developmental disruptions across multiple areas of functioning, not just the classic PTSD symptoms like flashbacks.
Yep.
DTD was designed specifically to capture this widespread damage.
But the proposal was rejected by the American Psychiatric Association back in 2011. Even so, you're saying the clinical profile of DTD is still vital for understanding these patients.
Absolutely. It describes a reality many clinicians see every day. The profile basically identified this pervasive pattern of dysregulation across 3 consistent areas.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is extreme emotional and arousal dysregulation. This means rapid, unpredictable shifts between extreme states. So sudden, intense tantrums, maybe rages, panic attacks, swinging to the complete opposite emotional detachment, flatness, dissociation. The basic ability to simply describe how they feel or to regulate those feelings is just shattered. They can't seem to put on that parasympathetic brake to calm themselves down.
Okay, emotional chaos. What's the second area?
Attentional and cognitive problems. These individuals are often constantly preoccupied with threat. Their internal radar is always scanning for danger.
Hypervigilance.
Right. And this dramatically impairs their ability to focus on anything that isn't directly related to survival. So things requiring sustained concentration, like schoolwork or complex tasks at a job, become incredibly difficult. Or sometimes you see the opposite, an impaired ability to perceive real threats, leading to extreme risk-taking or thrill-seeking, kind of like Tom on his motorcycle.
Makes sense. And the third area, the behavioral fallout.
This is self and relational dysregulation. Because their internal world is so chaotic, they often engage in these maladaptive attempts to self-soothe, things like compulsive masturbation, repetitive rocking, elaborate rituals.
Trying to find some control.
Or some sensation. And it also includes habitual or reactive self-harm, biting, cutting, burning themselves. These aren't necessarily suicidal gestures. Often they're desperate attempts to regain a sense of physical control, or maybe just to feel something real when they're otherwise feeling numb or dissociated. The sources also note many of these kids and adults really struggle with language processing, even fine motor coordination. They're using all their cognitive energy just trying to stay superficially organized and in control.
This whole DTD profile, it really highlights how incredibly difficult treatment must be. I mean, if a child or an adult is that shut down or using all their energy just to hold it together, how can traditional talk therapy even begin to work? It relies so much on narrative, on insight.
Yeah, often it simply can, not initially anyway. Brain imaging studies of people with chronic trauma histories show this alarmingly low, sometimes virtually no activation in the crucial self-sensing areas of the brain, specifically the medial prefrontal cortex, the MPFC, and the insula.
And those areas are our internal radar.
Pretty much. They're responsible for interoception. That's the technical term for registering your inner reality.
Like feeling hunger.
Retired.
Exactly. Or needing space, or feeling a subtle curiosity, or that just gut feeling, that wordless knowledge that underlies our conscious sense of self. If the MPFC and insula are shut down, you essentially lose your inner compass.
So you can't tell what you need.
You can't register what your body sensations are telling you.
Yeah.
You might struggle to define what you want or need. You might constantly rely on others for even simple decisions because your own internal reality is just inaccessible. So imagine trying to talk about your past trauma with a therapist when you can't even reliably register if you're hungry or if you actually feel safe sitting there in the room.
Yeah.
Conventional top-down talk therapy becomes almost useless when the patient literally can't access their own inner truth, their own felt sense.
Okay, that makes perfect sense then. If the injury is fundamentally held in the body, in that reptilian brain, the emotional brain, the limbic system, then the healing has to start there too. The sources call this limbic system therapy, right? A deliberate shift away from just talking about it towards regulating the body first.
Absolutely. It's a bottom-up approach. The fundamental goal is actually simple, though it sounds revolutionary compared to older models.
Yeah.
Restore the proper balance between the rational and emotional brains. You need to bring the individual back into what therapists call their window of tolerance.
Meaning not too high, not too low.
Exactly. As long as they're stuck in hyperarousal, that low road, constantly firing or completely shut down in that DVC collapse state, they literally cannot learn from new experiences.
Yeah.
They can't connect meaningfully with others, and they won't really benefit much from traditional talk therapy. So the initial work often is all about restoring the emotional brain to its proper, quiet background job of just housekeeping, taking care of the body's basic needs.
Okay, so let's start with the most basic bottom-up tool that literally everyone has access to: breath.
Breathing is like our internal remote control for the nervous system. Learning to breathe calmly is the most direct way to restore that parasympathetic brake on arousal.
How does that work mechanically?
Well, when you take a deep breath in, you actually activate the sympathetic nervous system slightly, the accelerator, and your heart speeds up a bit. But the crucial part is the exhale. When you exhale deeply, slowly, and completely, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the calming brake, which slows the heart back down.
So focusing on the out-breath is key.
Very key. The more focus you put on making that out-breath long and slow, maybe even pausing gently before inhaling again, the more you are manually calming your entire nervous system down.
And we can actually measure if this is working.
Yes, absolutely. Through something called heart rate variability, or HRV. Good HRV is a sign of a really flexible, healthy nervous system.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a high amount of fluctuation between your fastest heartbeat and your slowest heartbeat from moment to moment.
So variability is good.
High variability is good. It shows that the sympathetic gas pedal and the parasympathetic brake are communicating smoothly and are well balanced. Trauma survivors often show very low HRV, meaning their system is kind of rigidly stuck in one gear, usually on. Learning deep, slow breathing directly increases HRV and builds physiological resilience.
Okay, so breath is fundamental. Moving beyond that, you mentioned bodywork and therapeutic touch. That often feels like kind of a taboo subject in therapy, doesn't it? Especially with trauma survivors.
It's often unnecessarily avoided, yes, but it's actually vital because the most natural, ancient ways that humans calm distress, being held, touched, hugged, rocked, these are essential for establishing a felt sense of safety.
Which is often what's missing.
Exactly. For survivors who feel fundamentally unsafe in their own skin, maybe divorced from their physical reality, sometimes even disgusted by their own body, reconnecting with that physical reality is paramount. This doesn't have to be invasive. It can involve gentle therapeutic approaches like massage or movement therapies like Feldenkrais, or even just exercises focusing on mindful movement.
How does that help?
Clinicians help patients establish what they call inner islands of safety, specific parts of their body, maybe their hands or their feet or their torso, that they can learn to reliably feel as grounded, present, and calm. These physical anchors become allies against those generalized messages of panic or shutdown being carried by the vagus nerve.
Okay, that makes sense. Next up, let's talk about EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing. This seems like it bridges the body's regulation with actually processing the memories.
EMDR is really fascinating because it seems to work directly on those fragmented sensory imprints we talked about, like with Bill and the ink blot. By guiding the patient through specific eye movements, or sometimes using alternating bilateral stimulation like tapping on hands or knees,
Yeah.
it appears to unlock the brain's natural information processing mechanisms. Maybe mechanisms similar to what happens during REM sleep, during dreaming. It allows the patient to access those raw trauma imprints safely without being completely hijacked or overwhelmed by the flood of fragmented sensation.
So it doesn't re-traumatize them.
The goal is absolutely not to re-traumatize. It's to access it in a way that allows processing without overwhelm. And the change people report is often in the structure of the memory itself.
How does it change?
Instead of the patient saying, "I feel like I'm drowning in it right now," they might report something like, "I was floating on top of it." Or, crucially, now it feels like a whole story, like it fits together, instead of just being disconnected fragments, so it feels manageable.
It loses its immediate terror.
Exactly. The trauma loses its terrifying nowness. It becomes narrative memory, something that happened in the past, rather than something that feels like it's perpetually happening right now. And that is healing, transforming that raw physiological trigger into a coherent, dated story.
Okay, so alongside these more physiological approaches, there are also models for understanding the mind's internal chaos, like internal family systems or IFS.
Yes, ISS provides this really beautiful and compassionate map for the internal confusion that trauma often creates. It suggests that we all have different parts inside us, not as a sign of pathology, but as internal actors who play necessary roles.
What kinds of parts?
There are three main types: managers, firefighters, and exiled children. Managers are the proactive protectors. They carry the burden of keeping things under control, keeping you safe, keeping painful feelings locked away. Think of the relentless inner critic, or the part that makes you work all the time, or maybe even a part that uses self-cutting, not out of despair, but to try and stay grounded.
Okay. And the firefighters?
They're the reactive protectors. When the intense pain or fear of an exiled, injured child part, those deep feelings of abandonment, terror, shame starts to surface.
Yeah.
The firefighters jump in impulsively to put out the emotional blaze immediately, often with harmful behaviors. This could be binge drinking, compulsive eating, addictive gaming, obsessive porn use, substance abuse. They're trying to help manage the pain, but their methods are often destructive in the long run.
So the goal isn't to get rid of these parts?
No, not at all. You can't, and you wouldn't want to. The core goal in IFS is to cultivate mindful self-leadership. The self, with a capital S, is seen as the core of wisdom, compassion, curiosity, calm, confidence, all those positive qualities. And interestingly, accessing this self-state correlates directly with increased activation of those self-sensing brain areas, like the MPFC.
So the self can talk to the parts?
Exactly. When the mindful self is active, it can communicate with these protective parts, the managers and firefighters, with kindness and understanding. It can ask them to stand back a little, to trust the self to handle things. This means the person stops over-identifying with the anger, or as the self-critic, or as the binge eater.
Creating space?
Yes. Creating space for the core needs and feelings of those exiled, injured child parts to safely emerge and finally be heard, validated, and healed by the compassionate self. That's essential for internal harmony and reintegration.
And finally, we need to address the dimension that trauma perhaps most profoundly devastates: social connection, feeling safe with others.
Absolutely. Social support isn't just a nice to have. The science shows it's a biological necessity. Trauma fundamentally cuts people off, leaving them feeling isolated, alienated, sometimes literally feeling God-forsaken. This is why approaches that involve communal rhythms are so incredibly powerful for healing.
Like what kinds of things?
Activities like therapeutic theater groups, group movement practices, choral singing, even things like military drill, believe it or not. These are critical for creating what scientists call muscular bonding and visceral attunement between people.
Muscular bonding. How does that attunement work physiologically?
It's essentially the antidote to that hypervigilance or shutdown encoded by the trauma response, by the DVC. When we engage in movement that requires us to be synchronized with others, like mirroring exercises in drama therapy, or dancing together, or singing in harmony, we have to loosen our fixation on our own internal state and external threats.
You have to pay attention to the other person.
Right? You have to pay attention to another body, another rhythm, not just your own fear or self-consciousness. This synchronized activity helps attune nervous systems viscerally, co-regulating each other. And when these group exercises end in spontaneous laughter or giggles, or just a shared sense of relaxed presence, that's a powerful biological signal that the ventral vagal complex, the social engagement system, is back online. The system is registering safety through connection. Theater in particular is amazing because it allows survivors to safely embody difficult emotions, give voice to unspeakable experiences, and feel their common humanity by collectively confronting tragic realities, all within a structured, safe, shared, and regulating space. #outro. So what all these different pathways to, from just focusing on your breath to engaging in complex group movement, what they ultimately point towards is this really profound paradigm shift in how we think about healing.
Shifting away from just fixing symptoms.
Exactly. Moving entirely away from merely fixing behavioral symptoms and focusing instead on restoring fundamental human capabilities. We need to help people restore their capacity for self-regulation, for self-perception, for focused attention, and maybe most importantly, for safe connection with others.
And the sources really emphasize that this restoration, it takes immense courage, doesn't it? Because it means facing the cost of all that coping head on.
Oh, the cost of maintaining that glass wall, as Tom put it, is just staggering. It takes enormous constant psychic energy for survivors to deny, ignore, and split off large chunks of their own reality, the rage, the profound sadness, the physical sensations of the memories themselves.
And that denial has consequences.
Huge consequences. It leads directly to things like chronic pain, deep self-hatred, massive dissociation. So the only truly viable path forward requires tremendous courage, the courage to allow yourself to know what you know, to feel what you feel, even if that truth is brutally painful. and then to begin the challenging, slow work of reintegrating those split-off feelings like legitimate sadness and appropriate rage back into the conscious, purposeful self. That's how you start to build a meaningful life after devastation.
This whole shift in understanding from psychological problem to biological injury and relational repair, it has enormous implications for how we structure our communities, doesn't it? And how we invest societal resources, especially in prevention.
Absolutely. The economic argument alone for early intervention is incredibly compelling.
You mean investing early saves money later?
Dramatically so.
Yeah.
James Heckman, who won a Nobel Prize in economics, proved this with hard data. Every single dollar invested in high-quality early childhood programs, things like home visitation for new parents, good quality daycare support programs, results in about $7 of savings down the line.
$7 back for every dollar spent. How?
Savings on future costs related to welfare dependency, chronic health care needs, substance abuse treatment, and significantly incarceration. Nurturing safety, secure attachment, and good self-regulation skills early in life is empirically the single smartest, most cost-effective societal investment we can possibly make.
Which brings us right to the provocative final thought we wanted to leave you, the listener, with. It connects these choices directly to policy and even social justice.
Yeah, just look at the global comparison of outcomes. The U.S. currently has an incarceration rate of around 781 people per 100,000 citizens. Now compare that with countries like Norway or the Netherlands.
What are their rates?
They invest heavily in parental support, early childhood services, high-quality education, and their incarceration rates hover dramatically lower, somewhere between 71 and 81 per 100,000.
That's nearly 10 times lower, an order of magnitude difference.
It's a massive difference. So if we truly internalize this knowledge, the trauma is encoded in the body, and it manifests as profound dysregulation, as tantrums, spacing out, aggression, inability to focus, all that stuff, then we absolutely must adjust our public priorities accordingly.
So if trauma recovery involves restoring regulation and joyful engagement through the body, then the last things we should be cutting from school schedules are activities like chorus, PE, recess,
or theater, or anything that fosters creative movement and synchronized play. These aren't optional budget line items or fluffy extras.
They're essential tools.
They're essential public health tools. They are the very mechanisms that help heal the fragmented self, that help activate the social engagement system, that teach regulation through embodied experience. The choice, really, of whether we continue to primarily fund punishment and containment, or whether we start investing seriously in healing and prevention, whether we invest in the vagus nerve or the prison system, that choice is ours to make, based on what we now know about the biological reality of trauma.